Hello everyone, today we talk about understanding each other. You may say, what the hell, I came here for history videos and what's this about? Well, every once in a while I'll make a video like this, like really every once in a more than a while I would say, just to, you know, be a bit both closer to the audience in some ways, but really not really differing much in those regards. Um, Rather changing topic on the problems of communication that I think are very meaningful and very important. At every level, you want to address topics like history in general, and also about delivering and receiving contents via YouTube, for example. I think this is a very important topic today, more than in other moments in history in some way. I mean, communication has always been fundamental for civilization by every standard, and we all know what this means in practice. And we've come to a time when things do not seem to be really bad under this point of view, but they seem to be taking certain strange twists. And I'm not making here kind of a political or ideological statement. Really, as you know, I don't really care about these things, especially when it comes to Schwerpunkt, in which I believe you can't come to listen to videos without having the nuisance of listening to someone who has a political orientation imposed on the contents, and therefore on you as a consequence, and that actually doesn't really care about this stuff. Because if I had been interested in politics or other ideologies, etc., I would have simply said, okay, well, you know what, I will make this channel about policy, I will say extremely controversial things, I will start messing things up. And my point is, no, why? First of all, I'm not interested into that. And even if I wanted to talk about something controversial, I believe that most of the times I talk about history, I end up necessarily doing it, because guess why? What is really out of what's really controversial is a matter of subjective judgment by certain standards. I mean, controversial is let's say it's even difficult to define proper, but let's say that today everything that really touches certain topics in general is kind of controversial. It doesn't matter how you interpret them. But I can assure you that although I'm not an impartial person, because nobody really is, especially when you tell history, you have to follow a narrative by certain standards, which doesn't mean being politicized or ideologized, but simply that's how human brains work. Like, you can't tell a story basically if you don't approximate, for example. So for those people who believe that history can be just objective, what is objectivity in the first place? Like, that there is no positivistic approach to history, as you know, and as I presume that basically you, as my followers at this point, have understood. And I count really on you. I mean, I really mean it. I'm not saying it just anecdotally, or because I'm flattering you or making you a favor or asking you for, actually. But I'm making in part this video for you sometimes, because I realize that there are now a couple of people really following me regularly and intensely, and I think there is a miracle how I managed to make this channel and actually receiving so many moderate, thoughtful, polite comments and appreciations. Like, even people who disagree in this channel are really polite, right? There is a filter that automatically YouTube has for people who use bad words or put themselves kind of in a inflammatory way towards contents, and they're immediately filtered. And I collected really a very, very few, and at this point I made really literally hundreds of videos, and it turns out that's terrific. And I don't know whether it's my topics that really do not attract weird let's say angry or kind of punitive people. I know that in the future there will be some sort of expansion to this ground, meaning that the more people watch the channel, the more chances will be that someone will start to kind of harass it or to attack it. And it happens every time. I have no problem to block, because actually I think I blocked just maybe one person or two in like one year and a half actually more. And I don't think that of the hundreds and hundreds of of comments that I received in here, I haven't even thought to block people more than, like a tens of times, because I don't really see what's the point. I mean, if you criticize, for example, my contents, as you know, it's fine. If the comment is polite, I don't even pretend it to be actually a solid comment, like a meaningful comment. And if you say something that is radically different from my video, I will simply say, oh wow, but then I will leave it there, because actually hope that someone will come there and simply to confront this person politely, otherwise I will block the other user as well, and to just develop a discussion and debate. And I know that YouTube is not really the best site to make conversation, to make debates. It's not designed like that, and I think it's a pretty intelligent way, the way it's designed by certain standards. And that's obviously, you can say, well, that's because more people then will come on your channel also for the comments, and will engage in the comments, and will keep listening to the video. Yeah, there is also partly kind of economical interest under this point of view. Like, of course, more people will see the videos, they will listen to the videos, they will subscribe, hopefully, or at least they will enlarge this community and make it grow, right? And I don't have this megalomaniac aims. Like, I obviously hope to do this to reach as many people as possible, but that's not really my greatest anxiety. Actually, I hope at least this channel will not grow up, with a certain speed, and fortunately it seems that it's the case, because I also have other things to do, and that's a moment in my life I can't really dedicate myself fully to, like, controlling it or promoting it. I just make videos and I see what happens, basically. So that's the end of the story. You realize I'm making basically a video every day, and it's become even a sort of a partial way to stabilize my emotions during the day. That's something the routine helps to do. We all need that, that's why routine exists in the first place, because humans turns out humans function this way. But in general, I think that discussing about communication, and I think already by this 7 minutes I highlighted certain points that are really crucial at the end of the story, but I'm not really first of all, I hope I will not make a polemic content with this video, because I don't really care. But let's say that there have been events that happened some time ago that actually didn't happen on YouTube, fortunately, and actually it's a pretty big surprise that they occurred, like it's first time it occurs somewhere else, that weren't really positive. That I believe that it was a moment that left me a bit to wonder about many things, because here I don't want to enter into the story. I don't think you know about this, and it's not necessary. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't think it's important. Maybe one day I will talk about all the quarrels and the debates that happen every once in a while. I also was undecided today to make between a video about Facebook groups, for example, or about how prepare to an examination, and I will definitely make this stuff, because at the end of the day it's all intertwined in many ways. But today I would like to talk about communication abstractly, or at least for what it, let's say, it has to do with our daily stuff, because I would like to reflect with you with the importance of communicating and understanding, because it's not something you have to give for granted. I believe we all have this ability to listen, to understand, and to really be able to create a dialogue, right? This is the great thing. Dialogue means it's a bit like intelligence, right? It's a different way of putting it. Actually, it's respectively a Greek and a Latin word, but they give this ideas. Dialogue literally means going through, right? And therefore it renders this fact that there is a sort of barrier, first of all, and it stresses this element of communication that basically is able to break them all. I mean, to really to make a breach, in fact. in someone's understanding, a sphere of knowledge, etc. Intelligence is, I like it more in some ways. I mean, dialogue is more elegant. That's because the Greeks had a more elegant way to put things than the Latins. But in general, I like more intelligence as a term because it's also very similar to dialogue, but it also makes you understand the thing not really in a confrontational way, because the dialogue means that, you know, there is kind of a something to get through. It doesn't necessarily talk about wall against wall, right? But intelligence is the Latin term gives you this more passive behavior of the other side. Like, you know, it's as if you were to come to learn about something more static. It has sometimes even something to do with learning proper and rather than making a breach, right? You know, and it's particularly interesting because it really means to read through, right? And it's different, right? Into intelligo, you know, like it means to read into something, or, you know, within something. That is also important, and I think that, and that's obviously where that's where intelligence comes from, right? It's a bit it comes from, and this is this ability to really consider something and looking past beyond the surface, or at least what you consider to be just the surface of the appearance or the essence in itself, and therefore to come to understand the core, right? This is a very important concept that has to do with your ability fundamentally to know that there is a beyond in the first place. And I think this is already a very important thing to reflect on, is that when we talk about other people, sometimes we say, oh well, we dismiss the thing when someone doesn't understand us. We say things, oh, that person is stupid, like doesn't understand me, he's stupid fundamentally, it's not intelligent, right? But which sometimes it is true, of course, that there are people who are obviously more intelligent than others, and actually, for instance, in my case, I think I'm a pretty, you know, average intelligent person. I don't think I'm particularly intelligent, but also I don't think I'm particularly stupid, and I'm pretty balanced. You know, when I started, say, from equal ground with someone else in a competition, usually, intellectually speaking, I arrived, you know, in the middle, straight, you know, maybe slightly above the average, but never making, you know, the big great. And it's actually great, because also being very intelligent sometimes is very hard to bear. And in some ways, average people are kind of, they also tend to live better. They can have lots of other problems, actually, psychologically speaking, but fortunately it's not the case of me. Apparently, at least I have, I think, some form of mild psychological concerns, but I don't really feel myself as unfortunately I don't have any pathology or something, so I'm pretty, I feel I'm fine, you know, and I'm happy of being in this happy middle, right? But intelligence in this sense is something a bit more intellectually built rather than intelligently built. Like, intelligence, as we know, it has to do with the ability of your brain to train, right? You know, the notion that people are intelligent or cool without having, for example, even having opened a book in their life is pretty dumb. It's a you know, enough dumb conception as the idea that you only need books to be intelligent, and that's obviously not the case as well. I think as human beings, we have, for our mental and not just mental health, we should engage into things like, you know, intellectual activity, but also sports, also, you know, traveling, you know, even, you know, having a sort of social life. So that's the part perhaps in which I feel less versed into, not because I don't mingle, you know, willingly, but just because I'm kind of bored by it, by certain standards. But you know, there are pleasant aspects about humanity you shouldn't dismiss. So, you know, chances are that if you are not a very sociable person, you can be happy about that, because it turns out, statistically speaking, that less social people are more intelligent, on average, and it turns out it's very true, and this does create problems actually. And so intelligence, however, is, as you know, first of all, a very composite thing. First of all, knowledge is immense, so the way you train your mind can be very different. You really do grow to become a different person if you, let's say, you study history, or you study engineering, or you study philosophy, you study economics, study law, you study medicine. You start having getting a view of the world that if you're really engaged into your subject, you're really out there to learn more, to practice more, and to discover new things, really will shape you and mold you in ways you previously didn't know you could be capable of. And that's really the mistake that let's say, in this sense, everybody does actually. I don't want to say intelligent people or stupid people, here doesn't make sense. It's the idea that we refuse tendentially, you can read it in this way, although perhaps it's somewhat more complicated, is that humans have the tendency to underestimate the degree they can change, mentally speaking. This happens especially to young people, right? Young people are kind of like more like sponges, right? They're designed by nature, that age, to receive a lot of information, to absorb them, to rework them, and to be fluid, to be, in this sense, like they can be malleable, they can shape according to what life has to present them. Older people tend, in fact, to be more or less mentally elastic, but at the same time they have gained, hopefully, at least some sort of wisdom. I believe that there are really different types of intelligences, so even age by itself is a very important indicator, but actually only by itself is just like one of the many factors. There are people who, I know, that remain 20 years old, from a mental point of view, from an intellectual point of view, for all their lives. It doesn't matter that they are 80 or 90 or whatever. If you don't go through certain paths, you will basically not change. And the dramatic thing is that, in fact, the more, let's say, let's put it in this way, the less you learn, and the less you're able to change in some ways. It doesn't mean still that you basically overcome your let's say you increase your your idea that you will not change, but it turns out that at least that's one of the measurements. Let's say it's not surprised that on average, for example, more intelligent people turn out to be more prejudiced in the neutral sense of the world than less intelligent people, because it's a way of kind of foreseeing certain possibilities before others, right? And other people, in this sense, by not acknowledging how much they can change, they fundamentally tend to remain more static at the end of the day, but also having at one point this losing their flexibility, losing the effective ability to change. Now, this is dramatically important because it's as if you had a big, you were to take a lot of steps. Like, I don't know how you conceive yourself under this point of view, but for me, for example, life it's like a track where you have to progress necessarily. And when you look back at the past, the older you are, basically, you sense that how it really was before. This is normal, actually. But there are people who do not, that are capable of this with age, for example, but they're not able to project themselves beyond. Like, many people say, oh, well, because I think I'm wiser because I'm older, right? But then they're not able to see what they're going to do with that. Like, they experience the fact that probably they're wiser sometimes, maybe they're less intelligent, sometimes they're not even wise. Like, it's not automatic. Age doesn't necessarily make you wiser. There are a lot of people who screw up, their lives, even though they're naturally very mature. In apparently, I'm not talking just age proper. I'm talking even about people who are supposed to be mature in the sense that they can handle a life, a job, a family, something like that, and all of a sudden they're basically not capable of handling that anymore. And there are many reasons for this. It's not obviously about being intelligent or not. There are so many factors that that can be even 20 major ones. So you can't take things into account. But when it comes to communication, I think that a healthy interaction should be based on the ability to know that there is something beyond. Um, and to explain a bit of Schwerpunkt's psychology, really, what I do on this channel is in many ways to present certain historical facts, not much for the sake of information in itself, because otherwise I could make enormous and boring lists of stuff I paste and copy from everywhere, just listing facts. First of all, I don't have time, nor interest, nor capacity, I think, also to do something. I mean, I could even specialize partly into it. By certain degree, of course, I do collect information. I try to deliver it to you, otherwise this channel wouldn't have even one subscriber, because it would be devoid of actual contents. But I believe that beyond that, even with a few information, relatively few information, you can actually come to show that things you can say about a specific topic are really, well, not necessarily infinite, but let's say that they have possibly infinite implications, right? What I do on Schwerpunkt is really challenging the idea that we know. I mean, it's the people who have to shed light, on things. How do you really shed light? The best thing you should do, you could be able to do, is to shed doubts, right? This is very important, and believe me, I'm not saying it for any comment, anything in particular. This is something I think from a very, very, very long time, and I wanted to talk about this because of a bit more as a guide to Schwerpunkt contents at this point, because I communicate. I'm here the one who speaks, and speaks for hours every day, trying to make sense of certain things that evidently I have a limited knowledge of. Like, I'm not the ultra expert that engages in academic level stuff, that at least I try to do it on my own, but I don't talk about it on Schwerpunkt, and it's a very difficult enterprise. Maybe one day we'll tell you how certain things really work, and although they are amazing, at a certain time there is a lot of disappointment as well, because it turns out that positive achievements are surrounded by a huge amount of like things you wouldn't like to have to do with, and this partly makes you grow, because at this point it's the spin-off more than the thing in itself that has a value. And that's what also life should be about, is that you really need bad things to happen to you before you realize that there is even the problem. So the aim of what I'm doing on Schwerpunkt, specifically with history, is trying to if I really want to teach to do something, and I don't think I'm even particularly good at this, but I try, at least by certain standards, is to teach to doubt, which might sound pretty lame, because how many times, for example, I was searching for certain topics on Google, and that historical topics, because I want to. It usually happens when I search for the pictures that I put in the background. So I basically write about that topic, and that Google has the suggestions of, even before you finish typing, of all the stuff that people search with those initials of the name you're typing, and when you finish typing the proper name, and that's mostly about history, you find that what people have searched relatively to that topic, and that would be also a pretty interesting way to sort out things and to create question and answer video, because that's actually a pretty neutral and effective, from a statistic point of view, mean to answer in this sense to the problems. And there would be a lot of stuff to say from this stuff, from what you can read on YouTube, in the most diverse ways that can get intertwined even with my experience on Facebook, on YouTube, etc. That, however, is that many people search, and among these things, there is people search for facts, right? They search for facts, and you wonder what does this person really doing at that point? Because you see, for example, when a person who searches for facts is not really a person who is completely devoid of intelligence at this point, because you might think, oh, people are so dumb because they just search for the superficial stuff, right? Well, there's a bit of sense of superiority. It doesn't quite work like that. I like to interpret this in a bit more of a you know controversial way, in the sense that, if you search for facts, it happened to me to search for facts, and I don't remember about which topic actually, but it happens relatively rarely. This stuff that is being searched, it seems to be part of a much broader and much more widespread behavior compared to what on average I can do, or maybe other people. And there is this idea, first of all, that people tend to feel that if maybe they're not lied to, they somehow have difficulty to get good information, right? And the reason why they do this is probably that they know actually that there is something beyond, right? Because if people were just to buy everything you tell them, they wouldn't even specify that they want facts. They evidently have the ability to value certain contexts at the point that they feel unsatisfied, and they want to search for more. And that's particularly interesting because it makes me reflect on that many people will even search for this stuff, would bump into my videos, for example, or into topics that I talk about in general, or that I will cover in the future, and I wonder, how should I really answer to these people, right? It happens because if you look at the stats of the channel, basically the greatest part of the views at this point come largely from the outside. I mean, people will make Google searches, or maybe from the same YouTube, they search about a specific topic, and my topics are rarely the at the very top of the list. I mean, some of them are, because I said in the past that there are certain topics that I was the only one to cover, which is weird enough, because otherwise they're very well, let's say, and there's an enormous literature about them, and whoever goes at least at university knows that it's easy to find stuff about that. And that's also very meaningful because it tells you what ends up on the internet. That usually is stuff that probably doesn't belong to kind of academic production in some ways, even as a form of topic orientation, right? It seems that the most attractive topics are the most controversial ones, like the ones that have to do with things like clashes of civilizations and this deep moral outraging facts that people want to know because they have to throw obviously a lot of, let's say, I don't want to be a lot of mud, or let's put it this way, on other people, and that they need to feel reassured. Like, a person who searches for facts needs to be reassured. The bad thing is usually probably these people do not get reassured in the best imaginable way, because as we were saying before, already for searching for facts, there is already something potentially unsatisfied and therefore altered in this research, like maybe mildly, but saying, what the hell, is it possible, can't I find anything really clear about this topic? So when it happens that the users bump into my videos, I believe the first thing is, how should I answer to them, and how should I answer this point? So what I do on Schwerpunkt is to, first of all, to give some sort of good skeleton of information. I have, as we were saying before, the almost evident need to to have a base, a structure on which to ground my observations at least. But and this explains why it's plenty of videos out there that are actually very short. Now, as you know, many several times people said, but aren't these videos a bit long? Like, it's not that I don't really like it, but it's somehow they're difficult to follow, or I don't follow you because it's boring. Yeah, I know, but my videos are particularly long. Part of the reason why this happens is that I invest in that for reasons that partly elude from even actual information, but let's say that have still a name after all, because if you go to university, 1 hour and a half is the average lesson you're gonna listen to, and it turns out in a day you can even listen up to 3 or 4 of them. Hopefully not, because it would be dreadful, but let's say that those are the levels. If this is a good answer. For example, if you really want to understand something about history, you can't pretend that you can learn it, for example, first of all, from YouTube videos, because even my own videos, as you know, they probably are some of the most insightful, at least in from a general perspective. They are obviously superficial, right? And there are maybe every once in a while you find this topic that is maybe explained by an expert that has a very deep look into the thing, but generally speaking, videos do not pop out with that kind of, there is no connective tissue. Like, maybe, I don't know, in 10 years and 20 years, maybe YouTube will be overflooded by, super good detailed videos, because they, there will have been a system of selection of this kind. It's a bit like Wikipedia articles, right? Wikipedia articles before were considered like to be complete garbage, like, and at least for the English Wikipedia, I must say that some pages are actually pretty good. If you really want to get the essentials, like the general stuff, because that's assuming you've never heard about a certain topic, you just want to refresh your memory to get a quick information. Being so snobby about Wikipedia is not really a sign of great sophistication, right? There is this idea that even ospreys or stuff, this thing, that's a small book, so no, I use just the academic ones. Well, sometimes the academic ones can be wrong. For example, they can be very, let's say, very well presented, very well researched. There's also a problem of editing, publishing that has to do with money and this stuff. There are certain, let's say, books that are ill-written because they maybe are very researched, but they start from rigged theoretical basis. Like, take, for example, the reason why we talk so much about von Clausewitz. It's plenty of stuff that talks about von Clausewitz, but still, it doesn't seem that the masses have received the message. Part of the reason is that there are certain ways to deal with von Clausewitz. It's always looking him from the above, like saying, here I explain you how von Clausewitz really is, because I'm an academic, I'm a scholar, like, it's someone who understands deeply everything. Most likely you don't. And sometimes it's so evident that, but people buy into that. Like, they buy into that because they assume that a book, for just the fact of being a book, is somehow something more presentable than even a simple thought. As you know, I'm for hierarchies in general. I believe that if we develop this communicational systems, even universities, the academia, etc., they generally speaking they work. But to assume that this is always functional and that this is always a guarantee on the quality, on the level, is fairly naive, actually. And one, I must say, one of the things that you actually, if you are somehow at even at just a university level, but let's assume you're even a PhD or you're a scholar, you're someone who was beyond this, is well into things. Well, many of these people may, for example, be particularly narrow-minded, especially when with the academic fragmentation, where everybody's so self-absorbed about his own topic, that wants to be the prima donna of everything, and just the only way to do it. For example, we lack a very truly humanistic tradition of liberal arts that is disintegrating our society partly. But let's say if you're a healthy intellectual, let's put it in this way, the one of the coolest things ever, I think, is that you actually can read through the levels of quality without needing to check it, because the people were not into overly complex theories like that can't easily be accessible, because you don't really need to be able to formulate one in order to understand one when you see it, right? But part of the trick is in this is that I think the average person has a sort of incapability of it has this mechanism, let's put it in this way, but maybe better, for which they need facts checking. That's why you find so many Google searches with entries with that thing, that they want facts, because they think that the intellect works on the chain of sheer facts, like something you can't smash hardly against the hard facts or evidence. Turns out that, quite fortunately, telling the truth, that probably the most sophisticated and most ultimate levels of knowledge, that they are the ones that actually get to the bottom of the problem, most of all confrontate more than with hard facts with the fact that there are no facts. Like, right, today I was at a conference, for example. We were discussing well, I can't tell you what exactly now, because otherwise you will Google that, try to search about conferences that were talking about this today. You will find me. Yes, I don't want that. But it was about Byzantine history. Let's put it in this way. And we were talking, that it's not that Byzantine history is something dreadfully documented, especially in the early medieval times. Like, that there are many problems that are reflected also into Western Europe, etc. And the interesting thing is that the most sophisticated interpreters are being able to surrender intellectually to the fact that we don't know a freaking damn anything about how it really was, right? When I make videos, I sometimes say, it's not like it really works. It's not like I try to simplify that to push certain ideas, especially when I talk about macroscopic things, where I can't say really like a strengthening of the term, in order to make you understand that at least there is a very solid and powerful historiographical branch that tells you that that thing that was previously thought, now it's at best hotly debated, and therefore I address you towards this more complex thing. And that's where I wanted to get to, giving the answer to who wants sheer facts. Probably the best way you can make them understand is it is also very seducing, because it's even emotional from one side. It can work even as a way of making eventually the mind work, is telling them, look, we don't really know, and it's not that we don't know, because the average person at that point, remember, that person wants facts, right? They want facts, so they assume that you do not know because you're some kind of weak or ignorant, or maybe a resolute person that doesn't know because it's not the cool guy, doesn't know. Well, it's normal that average academics do not know, like, about 99.99% of the whole history, and that's perfectly normal. That's actually a pretty good achievement by certain standards. I don't know about the exact thing, but do not think that what is written in a history book is actual history. I mean, this is something, for example, I rarely hear about. I mean, it seems like everybody knows something, even when these documents are produced, because like YouTube videos, creators, like this terrible term that it makes you feel like the New Testament looming on you. Say, what are you creating? Well, yeah, also according to the New Testament, we're similarly to God, we should be able to create ourselves. Is part also one of our duties. But there is this, sense of empowerment, from creation that requires, for example, a discipline discipline in order to attain the results, right? And every creator naturally wants to create a sort of persona, a sort of and if you're there telling stories, usually you want to be felt as received as credible, for example. So that's pretty normal. So there is this kind of egoistic or egotistic or sometimes even narcissistic twist for which creators portray themselves in some way as overconfident about their knowledge, right? There are people who are really good at this, and say that there are people who can stay relatively neutral to things. I'm probably not this person, because I believe that even if I'm sort of calm and I tell the story in a relatively relaxing way, you can still feel the inner tension that exists, that I always pose, and it's fairly good actually. It's seemingly a sign even of self-confidence, because if I felt challenged and I wouldn't have the guts of coming here telling these things, I wouldn't even speak up. And there are people who have such problems. It's dreadful, I believe. There are ways to cure this, but it's important also to have self-esteem, right? There is definitely a healthy way of being egoistic in some ways. Okay, well, that's not the best term, but you understand what you mean. You must have an ego in order to do certain things. People without egos are, they suicide themselves because they can't handle life. They can't do anything about it, and that's not healthy. It's a problem. It's a pathology. But the idea is that maybe they want to show you, they want to prove you that their point is the right one, right? That they are the ones who deliver you this chain of this cascade of sheer facts, right? Instead, I believe, and that can hold up to a certain point, because what happens is paradoxically that this process triggers those same questions about facts, because it turns out that, in fact, most of the times there are no facts, or at least there is some evidence about something that we can't actually clearly understand. So someone buys this thing in a kind of arranged way that it kind of looks like facts, and it turns out that most of the times it's not true. And believe me, even I think you know what I'm going to end with this now, but even in my case, for example, when I try to put a bit of doubt, I admit it, it's most of the times because also I don't know really the thing to the core, so that I can tell you, look, this is the way I see it because I have studied. And there is no person who can cover so many topics without knowing them all. It doesn't exist. There are no scholars of this kind. There are not intelligences of this kind. They used to exist, but in a much distant past, and in a moment in which people also knew dreadfully less, and they had also some other kind of beliefs to compensate. This partly of the reason why we have compartmentalized our knowledge and specialized into things is that we objectively have way more to know, and we need this didactic approximations in order to start in the first place, like to have this more or less large fitting structures within which you can eventually fill with knowledge, with in a kind of a sort of orderly way. What school and university really are, it's not really about the overload of facts. It's about making your mind exercise over a certain topic and knowing about the complexity of it, and knowing in this sense hopefully how to deal with it. And why is it paradoxical that this creates the need for facts at the end of the day? Well, simply because it turns out this structure is not based on facts. It's based on kind of arbitrary conceptions that are very difficult to hold together, because they're approximate. And basically most of what our healthy and most sophisticated historiography today, but this doesn't happen just in history. History is a sort of social science, and you see that this is happening everywhere, like even psychiatry is happening in in much more scientific subject, like in sometimes are things like anthropology, etc., is that we have come to describe the world, especially in the last 200, 300 years, with industrialization, when the world speeded up in a way that was unprecedented, like, right, and we obviously needed those structures, because if we hadn't had them, we wouldn't have known how to manage the incredible forces that we have, unleashed from nature, from through technology and all this stuff. But it turns out now that we're kind of, after the big, rise, we're kind of stationing now. You're kind of stalling. Seems economy doesn't fare very well in the first place, in general, worldwide, in the sense that one country can do better when another one can do worse. But if you look at the major, the world market, I mean, the greater expectations we had about, production stuff, it hasn't really met now the problem. And I have my opinions of this. I also have, I follow the Austrian School of Economics, because that's really like the only thing it kind of makes sense to me. But I'm no economist, in spite of studied 1 year of economics as well. But I have my ideas with that. But at this point, the real problem is that we have to face, and that's probably one of our greatest challenges, is getting rid of the positivistic presumption that we can know things, because this is something that up to 300 years ago didn't exist. Like, a sort of positivism is proper of it's proper perhaps a bit of Western culture. I believe that from Hellenic thought we do get the tiny of sometimes even healthy positivism that helps, in fact, to frame knowledge in itself, because you, as we were saying before, you do need a narrative, and it's always, say it's better comparably to have a kind of a progressivistic myth, that kind of a declining one, having this sense that everything is doomed. That's not propositive at all. So it's better to be bold and to throw yourself into chaos and try to make sense of it, rather than simply surrender to chaos in the first place. And it's interesting, because certain world conceptions historically didn't count to this very much, and that's why also Hellenic thought is so important for our history, etc., our culture at the end of the day, and the way we do reason, right? Because even part of the Enlightenment drew heavily from that, I mean, in terms of categorizations, although it was fairly different, to tell the truth. But we should be able to stop pretending at this point that things always have a positive outcome. Because most of the times, and if you look at history in general, even think about they do not. Think about the concept of evolution that we tend to see as kind of a progress sometimes. There is no progress in evolution. It's a series of really random factors, in the way there is also this genetic, I don't know how to say it in English, but idea that there are changes sometimes, also because from generation to generation there are certain random changes, not just something that's inherited from the and that makes sense, because matter does change. It's impossible to make two things that are actually equal to another. Like, even homozygote twins are different at the end of the day, not just as personas, but they are different as organisms. But in general, evolution is based not on the idea that there is a positive evolution, because that would be Lamarck. I give you that. Even Darwinism is being, and I'm not being, controversial here, because, I'm a Darwin. I believe in Darwinism, actually, but there is also in here being, could be even far more complex than that. At least that's a pretty solid and good theory that does explain basically 99% of all we see, and that's perfectly fine, and you should engage into that. If you're anti-Darwinist, you really can't do very much, I believe, in history. But let's say that, going back to the point, that evolution is based on true Darwinism, what is about, on the concept of that survival happens because other people die. species are selected over time, because basically there is someone else that is killed. So you don't have to see it as a progress, but just, think of the lucky bastard that survived while the other succumbed, right? And for things that maybe weren't even because he was kind of good, right? Many intelligent people, for example, in certain cases, cannot make it, right? Sometimes, a species is saved not because it's smarter, but maybe looks a different color, or it has another size. That's the how, far it can go, in the sense in demolishing a progressive positivistic view of the world. I threw into evolution because I thought it's that it goes it went from the 19th century in parallel with this very deeply rooted positivistic thoughts that were beyond actually Darwin's intentions, and that he feared the inherent risks that were present in there, in these conceptions. It's not surprising it's from Darwinism that even racism partly got this structure, this pseudo-scientific idea that there were somehow superior, inferior races. It was actually a rape of Darwinism in itself. But you realize that, for example, is the product of a historical period where those things could be thought, because people were obsessed by the race, the competition, the growth, the thing that has to grow no matter what. And don't think we got rid of that. Of course, we had terrific episodes that came in the 20th century, especially to shatter our confidence in our future. The two world wars, the threat of annihilation during the Cold War. It's not that also the third millennium started actually with this particularly bright, events. Take 9/11, take about the economical crisis, take this, general loss of confidence we had. I mean, I remember how it was before, let's say, the years 2000s. Let's say there was the idea that somehow things could go better, things would go better. Remember when they were told, like, in the 2000s we would, we will go in 2020, we would live on Mars, and we would eat pills, and we would get back on, to work on Mars and come home on Earth for dinner. That's, well, obviously it wasn't really like that, but the idea was the promise that the future is always there, that everything always goes kind of better thing. No, it doesn't. And the seriously wrong thing with this is not really understanding science in itself, because science is brutally honest about everything, or nor understanding history, nor understanding society, nor understanding economics. But it's much deeper. It actually goes, not understanding technology, for example, but it's much deeper, and it goes to the individual responsibility. Like, because if you think that things are gonna go better, doesn't matter your commitment into it, or your partial commitment into it, your limited commitment into it, you have basically given up a lot of actual responsibility for yourself, which means that if you know how progress really happens historically speaking, you should know it passes through the death of millions of people. And it doesn't seem that you're willing to die, for example, in order to make a freaking change. Obviously, I'm not telling you that you should, nor I would, for example, do it. But the concept is that progress has a monstrous cost. And it turns out that the specific progress that we have sought, or progress in itself, because actually, that's how it goes. Let's say you can talk about a bettering of the conditions, but of living conditions and all, but progress is slightly kind of a different thing, even semantically speaking, and conceptually and ideologically speaking. But it really erases you that really tells you how much you really do not have to make a lot of effort in order to earn your bread. And I have the deepest sympathy, in fact, for those people who, free of as many restraints as society can give, can actually produce a freaking lot, because they're left free to do what they can do best, so that other people can buy that and can help it. Of course, I will not engage myself into this, ideological debates about how society should be ruled, and whether it should be state intervention, everything should be left free. But let's say that um, progress does not exist. If you really want to make a serious historical assessment, it's just an impression, it's just a narrative that we've used when things were doing particularly fine. But it's something that up to 200, 300 years didn't belong to us. And you would say, but how then did people do at that time? I mean, what was the horizon? Well, there were other values. First of all, people were projected much more into afterlife, for example, in terms of expectations than they were in real life. Which doesn't mean that real life was really considered as meaningless. People were, much more even pragmatically and effectively oriented, on average, in terms of individual capabilities than we are today. But the two things are deeply intertwined. I mean, the concept that there is a sort of moral standard, that it doesn't matter where you come from, maybe it does, but generally speaking, humans have similar forms, patterns of commitment that they have used in order to boost themselves, and it's always there. It's the way also we are regulated, hormonally speaking, or in other ways, is that you have to take responsibility for your own actions, which means that if tomorrow, like, the worst thing happens and you are the only one who can solve it, your point is not asking why it happened to me, even though it sounds kind of normal, instinctive, but actually accepting that bad things, let's call it this way, happen, and that would be like the normal state of things. So that what is, I mean, on average, at least in life, and that's what you can expect actually from existence. That is something pretty miserable in many ways. Like, I think that life is beautiful, for example, but it still doesn't mean that life is beautiful because it's happy, for example. I don't think that life could be beautiful if we were always happy, for example. I think that we give sense even to beauty. Beauty is dramatically important in order to give moral boost in many ways. In order to overcome reality, because we are bred into reality. Evolution is exactly this. We emerged from millions and millions and millions of years of evolution through people, through individuals dying, not making it, and other people, and other individuals, I always say people, individuals watching that and being freaking terrified. And that's the grade zero, let's say, of reality. So pretending that good things happen just because you have kind of wishes that things happen because that makes you feel good, for example, well, it's not quite of a good option. So why am I saying this, engaging to this kind of philosophical / existential rant? It's because it happens the same thing with history and telling about a reality, let's say, of how we can describe it, how we can see it and experience it and learn from it. So when you approach history, you should not think genuinely that you can actually make a positivistic progress into it. A progress in the first place into it. You can definitely improve the way, for example, a specific topic. It's easy, for example, to be fascinated, intellectually speaking, especially when you don't know that certain things exist, because you say, wow, did these things exist? Was I so dumb to pretend that it was just that the world stopped to what I think it stopped? I thought it stopped. There is so much more. That's what fairly young people believe, is that they fundamentally get in love with the idea of knowledge as much as in the same idea of love, and in many ways that in fact they're very idealistic. But eventually you realize the cost of it, and probably one of the most satisfying intellectual um, achievements is when you realize that even people you extremely um, l- admire for their knowledge, and that you still consider as definitely people who know more than you, are now kind of intellectually naked in front of you. Like that, even if you don't actually know what is in that people's mind, you can measure how it kind of emerges from it. Like you can sense, for example, what is what are the limits of that person, because that is automatically what pushes you even further, and that's where you can see a sort of, let's put it, of progress in general, in the idea that that came from understanding limits, not actually for gaining um, positive knowledge, right? Something that I mean, knowledge is always positive in this sense, but it's something that maybe had that limited your expectations. That's what has kind of a greater importance in some ways. This is also what Popper partly said. What if you want, even Kant basically conceived in with the limits of human knowledge, etc. But it's powerful because it makes you grounded, right? So for those people who search for facts, the best medicine should be to make them understand, let's say, kind of by standards, that there are answers. First of all, that there is truth. The truth does exist. I don't know how you see it in this point, but for me, truth does exist, and how it exists. Then the fact that the truth exists doesn't actually mean at all that we have the means to understand it. And as well, by the way, that we can't even approach it, right? This is not a matter of understanding in a kind of a partial way, like acknowledging the existence of something. This is about actually understanding what actually understanding is, that is the impossibility of understanding. That's the trick. That's how twisted it is, but how beautiful it is at the end of the day. And that's what really makes you fall in love with everything that is about knowledge, really, because you understand it endly in a kind of a healthy way how it happens. And I personally got to this stage now. Maybe it even gets better, but I doubt it does, actually, unfortunately. But given the amount of knowledge you can gain in this sense, the more you engage into it, and the more it satisfies you in so many ways. So I think what I do on Schwerpunkt at this point is evidently about making people aware of the complexity. Not even about the complicated nature, because that's another story, but even the complexity is enough, because once a person understands the idea that things are somehow broader than what they are, well, then it immediately the awareness that there's also kind of complicated immediately sparks, right? That's obvious, because chances are that things are complex, but in the sense, being complex automatically means, by a certain degree, and probably a lesser degree, that they're complicated as well, or at least that it complicates the picture. Let's put it in this perspective. So at the end of the day, we didn't talk a lot about communication, did we? I mean, but this is all, it really lies under understanding and communication, because what I'm doing here is trying to instill these thoughts. I mean, I personally wouldn't feel this is not an excuse for okay, this is also partly, of course, an excuse to say, okay, I could make much proper searches before making a video, for example. I could come up surely with lots of things, but at that point also things terribly overcomplicate. So at that point, would I even be followed? Because that's the problem I have. Like, probably many people would like that, and the problem is that even maybe I'm not intelligent enough, or maybe I don't have time enough, especially if I want to make a video a day, which dramatically help the channel to grow and to expand. And I believe that I find, let's say, I found this optimum for which the videos are long enough. They're kind of they kind of have an informational quality that also fits the standards. They cover several topics. They do admit they're kind of generalistic, so there is always room for improvement. And yet, where do you find this stuff elsewhere? I mean, not because I do it. As I said before, you know, there are videos that maybe I wish I hadn't done, for example, or because I wish I had done at least better. Let's put it in this way, and that's the impression that I always have every time I come here and to speak at the end of the video or before. I actually also never re-listen to myself because I don't think it helps. But or maybe it does, but to say, you know, it's better to learn about new things rather than, I mean, you should know what you're doing, right? At least. And that's also a big problem, because sometimes we don't really know what we are doing. We have to find a sense. We have to find a an aim, purpose. That's also no less important. Maybe we'll talk about that on another occasion. But this is the concept at the end of the day. You don't come here because you want facts. You come here because you want to become aware of the complexity of the thing. That's really what it matters at the end of the day, and I think that's the new frontier. And you know, you will there is something about this interpretation that I also would like really to put you in guard against. It's the idea that there are people who play this card, saying in a slight different way, basically, that there are ways to do this without basically even attempting to reach reality. Well, never listen to those people, because those, I mean, without even caring, about reaching reality. Meaning what? That there is a freaking huge difference between believing that the truth does exist and fighting and struggling for getting closer to it, and someone who instead says, let's say, it's not the truth that doesn't even exist. It's more about the fact that I don't care about it. And that's moral relativism, and that's bad, in case you didn't know. And that's bad simply because, basically, with it doesn't teach you to put thoughts together. It simply tells you a lot of things that usually have a narrative on their own, so that they're technically put together, but in such a shallow manner that it's aimed not at stimulating intelligence, but actually making people feeling emotionally uncomfortable or challenged. You know what I think about these things. I mean, we wouldn't basically talk about von Clausewitz in the first place if we were to consider this as a sort of a rule, because basically everything does come from intelligence, and once you realize the limits of intelligence, of reason, you can actually know how to use it better. That's the real point. That's what really makes the difference. The fact of acknowledging that we have cognitive difficulties to understand reality, and that we struggle to it, doesn't absolutely mean that you should basically give up and simply say, okay, I'm done for it, and I can't just live in nihilism and not caring about anything, not taking responsibility, because this is partly the narrative you're being told, that all this story basically has no sense, that basically it's all a random thing. It is not. Humans are not just a random set of things that randomly happen together. And this is not just we would say, well, then you're a determinist. You know, I mean you just blindly believe in free will. Actually, Well, no, not really. I have problems. I'm a possibilist, actually. I think that in this case, that's what partly what the truth is really about, and therefore you can, and you should probably at that point believe that both free will and determinism are viable options, and that it doesn't even make sense to lean for one towards one or the other. For example, when I was younger, and I think this happens for lots of people, I was much more determinist. I love determinism. I like the idea that things that even we do and think are actually the product of all that happens before. And who said it's not true? But then I began to realize that even if this was true, and still the way we work basically is about what also we care, what we can do, the choices we take. So you should take this like both as equal options in your life, because you can't just be an idealist as much as you can't just be a structuralist. You have to be placed, fundamental positioned somehow in the middle of to have an equilibrated view of the wall. So even the idea, okay, there is no truth, it doesn't matter, you can't say everything and everything is right. Obviously it's not so. Obviously it's not true. It doesn't work like that. Our world does not shape itself like that. It's not like this product should be you life is not that simply, and it's simply because it's basically impossible to reason otherwise, right? But seriously, this is a level, that there are psychological limits in this sense. So never buy people who want to, in fact, buy yourself through emotions only. I mean, emotions are important to motivate, etc., but reason is more important. At least reason is what brought us to make planes fly in the air, and and to have the technology we have to communicate today, and to the high quality of life that seemingly nobody gives a damn anymore, because everybody is complaining while we live pretty well, right? And this is something that even someone living 100 years ago would have said, you live in this fashion and you're not happy. And that's part of the human kind of delusion. It's the idea that it still works at the end of the day, is that you have always to improve. It's a way it's a tool we are inserted in. We work like that. That even when things seem to go particularly well from before, still we're not satisfied. We want more. It's not even a matter of, I don't know whether there is an end to this, because obviously this is being pointed out, like, that our societies are too artificial, biologically speaking. Like, with the way our nervous system developed compared to the rest of the body is dramatic. Like, and we created as a society a world, as humans, a society actually that simply doesn't fit the way we are supposed to work. And this gets worse in the sense that we are getting pretty damn far from it. And it's strange because, and that's why I'm losing part of my slight optimism toward the future, because sometimes we think that this somehow that emerged together with civilization, and that it's a problem that somehow never occurred. That's a very difficult, it's a very tricky way of seeing the story, because obviously we tend to say, okay, civilization is mostly identifiable, because basically it happened just a few millennia ago, and then therefore it's pretty easily identifiable, and we take that as a standard to understand what civilization is. And therefore there are even these primitivists and survivalists who say, no, well, it was better before. We don't, that's not the evidence. The point is not that. The point is not the actual quality of life in terms of actual life expectancy, etc. That is beyond discussion. What is in discussion in here is the commitment. And we fail to recognize that, and that's tricky because we assume, in fact, that since we are so absorbed into civilization, that the improvements of the last centuries are just too good. They appear just too great, not to cause kind of a terrible backside of the story. Like you, you. Now I don't want to get specific into certain things because those are really controversial, by the way, and I should better not quite address them. At least in this, maybe in this context it would even make sense. But let's say that the collapse of certain social structures. And I'm not talking about this politically, I'm really talking about certain hierarchies, even in the relations, about human beings in general, as humans, like even on the base of gender or something like that, is a problem, because even though by certain standards you can see kind of an improvement from that, it turns out and that's what science tells us. That's why you should believe in science actually so much. What science tells us is that that's not really good, or at least it's good because it came along with other things that were an improvement, but it kind of made us less humans in this for what humans are really programmed for. And the sad thing about this is exactly this, that we don't change. We do change, but with a kind of an extremely slow rate. Like you can't say that people who lived 2,000 years ago are radically different from you. They're not. They're actually exactly the same people, even biologically speaking. So it's it's a problem because there is a lack of commitment, lack of purpose. To make it simpler, people were more driven. People are actually more driven the more they are under pressure, and that comes along with pretty after effects, side effects, let's say, of the story. That, however, makes you wonder whether this makes sense at all. I mean, not history as a, because civilization did happen, right? Civilization is something that has an intrinsic and apparent good into the end of the story, and the problem is that as humans we don't know how to relate to that. Actually, we have to find how it really is, and it turns out we really can't. That's what, at least, if you study, clinical psychology or something, you realize that, or psychology in general, you can't live a good life or a beautiful life if you are, let's say, happy. Let's say better, happy is not the answer. Happiness is not the answer. Happiness is not all. That's not what we're seeking for. Or at least, more happiness does make us, paradoxically, less capable of being humans. Now, this is a dreadful message in part, and I don't think that you should agree with this, because actually some might ramble at this point in my conclusions, but I'm not kidding. This is what is emerging from kind of scientific literature, is that there are options, probably, and hopefully, but definitely that's how the trend really is. And that is being proven by, among other things, the fact that our societies feel that there is something seriously wrong about them. And on here, I also wouldn't like to make historical relativism, but because everybody thought that life was bad in the, wherever it existed, the society was messed up. There were problems everywhere. The problem is now we dramatically overcome them. It seems like everything is doomed. But so is this real? I mean, there are probably options, but part of these options are to make a huge effort, in my opinion, as a civilization, to accept once again the limits of a phase of our history that has um, overshot in some ways, and that has made it too overly confident, which doesn't mean that is bad, because we all know that in order to learn discipline and to to grow, etc., overconfidence is in fact overconfidence. You do need confidence as much as you do need fear, prudence, and they have to be balanced. I think we arrived at a point in which it's not balanced anymore, and there are things that pushed us to be so, and there will be probably a sort of normalization at one point. I'm not pretending even, talking about normalization is also another problem yet, because what is normal, right? There's not a normalization, but at least taking relative standards like the ones of, in the last centuries, you realize that certain things can be fixed, and yet there are things that are now too, too developed to regress, to go away from them. I personally think actually that in the future there will be a sort of giant, I'm going too far maybe in this, but there will be a point at which many people will want to create societies on their own once again, like going back to certain types of lifestyle that actually doesn't imply, necessarily primitivism or survivalism or communitarianism. Not necessarily. There is a huge risk of that, telling the truth, but that will become normal, because people will probably lose faith in our society. They will probably lose the ability to see this as a sensible path to take. And now I'm getting pretty hermetic and weird and saying things maybe you wish you hadn't listened to, but I at the same time I think that there is some problem in here, and it's not just anecdotal. It's not just the usual existential anxiety of mankind that pushed everybody, but the problem is that before we could find answers, and we actually know about those answers, and they were maybe not the ultimate problem solver, but they were an interpretation. Here it seems now that we know these answers, or at least we don't know these answers, but we know that there were, and we dismissed them. And we just think they are basically old, and we can't accept them because there should be something necessarily new, just like there has to be a continuous progress, just like everything has to to go even the limits of rationality, of good reason, of plausibility, right? And I believe me, there is nothing really specific in this topic. You don't really have to read necessarily through the lines of this. I mean, it's you can, and you will, I'm sure, but I'm really referring to this, even though using examples that are kind of relative to certain point, etc. That I'm trying to be as say vague and abstract as possible, right? This is a greater problem that everybody can experience everywhere in the world, from every kind of extraction, every kind of background, every kind of belief, right? Because we're all humans. That's a problem, or maybe and this is the great thing, that we can assess to have a problem. That's why I still have, paradoxically, I abandoned my neutral, usual Aristotelian virtue of in the very center of things, to keep myself to be still slightly more optimistic than pessimistic, or completely neutral, even if probably there is never such a thing, because I believe that we do have a choice, right? That we always have a choice. That as long as humanity is here, we always have the ability to say, I can think otherwise. I can start from this. I can treasure my thoughts. I can treasure my ideas, and I can build upon. So I don't know how this started from communications, or communication and understanding, but it is strictly linked to it, because great part of this crisis is symptomatically showed, in my opinion, by the deep lack of, and the deep fall into, let's say, of understanding and of comprehension. At the end of the day, we do communicate a lot, but it seems that we are not able to signify a lot. That's not just a merely economical thing, like the increase of the products basically makes the demand falling. It's really, and therefore our arguments become cheaper and cheaper. It's probably just even sort of optical effect. I want to hope, because after all, I really don't see why the world should fall into a huge catastrophe. But I'm pretty sure that we will pay partly, or we are already paying actually, for the forgetfulness of our world, of our achievements, of our civilization. Yeah, something like that, let's say. So I hope that this made some sense, or at least sparked some thought. I believe it's important, and we should reflect on it. Then, yeah, that's pretty much it. So hopefully tomorrow I will make another history video, but perhaps that's what you're mostly interested in. However, well, I nevertheless hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like, or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.